Hi, everyone. Amanda here, and welcome to week one of our meal prep challenge. So, to kick off the new year, we want to lay a good base foundation for our eating and, most importantly, our meal prep habits, right? So, we will touch upon an anti-inflammatory diet tonight. So, to lay the foundation for a healthy diet that most general adults could and should follow. However, we will also touch upon it in the context of our food groups and our macronutrients just to help with better understanding of that portion meal planner that is provided or being provided to you. And if you'd like to track your food intake to better understand your macronutrient intake throughout the course of the challenge. However, that is not required, but a helpful tool. So today, an overview of the presentation. We'll go over food groups versus macros. We'll touch upon food categories, recommended foods to choose within food groups, our macronutrient intake, and how that can support our health outcomes and reduce risk for metabolic disease. We will provide you with your calorie needs with your portion meal planner, and we'll go over some options for better tracking if that is something you may be interested in doing throughout the course of the challenge. So, of course, a food group, right? Any number of categories into which the foods are classified. So, food groups are more like fruits, vegetables, beans, our animal-based proteins, for example. A macronutrient is a more encompassing term. So it breaks down to our key types of food molecules that are needed in the largest quantities in our diet, typically in terms of grams, right? So think like carbs, fats, proteins, for example. So here is a list of our main macronutrients. So the main ones that are typically mentioned are protein, fat, and carbs. Water and fiber, however, are also considered our macronutrients. So they are essential for life. Micronutrients are more so like your vitamins and minerals, typically needed in smaller quantities, like milligrams, for example, potassium and magnesium, vitamin D as well. Carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, uh, they are calculated in terms of how much calories per gram um, are equivalent to helping to burn them off. So carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram, fats are 9 calories per gram as they're a little denser, and proteins are also 4 calories per gram, same as carbs. What makes them a little bit more different, especially between carbohydrates and proteins, is carbohydrates typically come from plants like your fruits, your vegetables, your beans, starchy vegetables, for example, uh, and also dairy, right, in the form of our lactose. That could be like cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, low-fat cheese, or organic whole-fat cheese are good examples of carbohydrate-based dairy sources. They are our main source of energy, as most people are running off glucose, right? Like most of us are not in a chronic state of ketosis, aka using fat for energy, versus using carbs or glucose for energy. Carbohydrates are commonly found in the forms of sugars, starches, and fibers. They're stored in the form of glycogen in our liver and our muscles. So sometimes when people lose weight in an extreme carb deficit, you might see their liver functioning enzymes rise as a sign that their liver is stressed, working hard to pull that glycogen from that liver to use as energy. Just an interesting fun fact. So fats, they're found in both plants and animals, right? By that, plants meaning like say coconut oil, coconut milk, and animals, of course, in our animal fats, like our fatty beef, for example. Other plant-based fats are like our avocados, although they're a fruit, they are classified as a fat, and our nuts and seeds, or olives, olive oil. Sources of energy and protection is how we want to think of fats. So they're 9 calories per gram. They're more energy dense. And of course, we store fat as our primary storage form of energy. Classified by saturation and length, right? So we have unsaturated and polyunsaturated, or I should say monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Those are our good cardioprotective, heart healthy fats. Like monounsaturated fats would be our olive oil, for example. They are saturated, meaning that saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So, coconut oil, for example, is a solid fat at room temperature. It can increase our risk of developing elevated cholesterol levels, for example. Another example of a solid fat at room temperature, think about it, humans, right? We're animals, our fat's solid at room temperature. So is, the cows, for example. Common, we had touched on that. Stored as a fat, aka our fat tissue, adipose tissue is another term for fat tissue. Proteins can come in plants and animals. For example, beans are a protein plant-based source, and of course, animals, chicken, turkey, fish, eggs. It's not a preferred source of fuel. Good, because we don't want our body eating our muscle for energy. That's why we're going to try to eat enough protein throughout this challenge so that our body can be in a calorie deficit for those trying to lose body fat, so that your body can burn fat or carbohydrates as a source of fuel. And if you're eating enough protein, your body is unlikely to utilize your protein as a energy source or a part of what's called catabolic metabolism, which sounds like cannibalism, right? Because your body is actually eating away at itself in the process of catabolism. So proteins in their smallest form break down to amino acids, fats break down to free fatty acids, and carbohydrates break down to glucose, right? Or sugar, all carbs too, except for fiber. Fiber just passes right through us and is indigestible. We do not have a storage form of amino acids. Our major storage form of protein is our muscle, and there are 9 essential amino acids that the body must take in and cannot generate on its own. Same with fats. Some essential fatty acids are like omega-3s. So if we don't eat enough fat in our diet from typically marine-based sources like tuna, salmon, oysters, for example, we run the risk of uh, omega-3 deficiency. So if someone's like vegan or vegetarian, it's definitely a good option to supplement. Someone can get plant-based sources of omega-3s, but it's very hard for the body to some people, especially genetically, to convert the plant-based form of omega-3s over to a more absorbable form of like EPA or DHA omega-3s. So our macronutrients, let's get back to macros. So this image just depicts everything that I was just talking about previously, except alcohol is added on and water. So of course, water breaks down to H2O and has 0 calories. Alcohol is 7 calories per gram. So it's on that denser side, closer to fat. So that's what can make it a little higher in calories. But what also stinks about it is we're taking in those calories from alcohol, but there's no nutritional value. So it's not like we're getting any vitamins, minerals, protein, fiber to, do our body a favor. And the breakdown form of alcohol is ethanol. So what does it mean when people talk about like their macros, they're tracking their macros? So we touched upon how macros are mainly our carbs, fats, and proteins, right? Yes, there's water and alcohol and fiber in there, but typically when someone says that, they mean their carbs, fats, their proteins. So say an individual needs 2,000 calories per day. Let's make the math easy. And they're doing 40% of their diet from carbs. So what they would do is 0.4 times 2,000 to give 80 calories from carbs. So then we know carbs are 4 calories per gram. We divide that by 4 to get 200 grams of carbs per day. Same thing goes for protein because protein is also 4 calories per gram. So say the individual's doing about 25% of their calories coming from protein. 0.25 times 2,000 equals 500 calories from protein. Divide that by 4 because protein is also 4 calories per gram. We get 125 grams. Fat is different, right? 9 calories per gram. Fat is denser. So if I have like that classic hotel pat of butter that's like this big and an apple this big, They're both about 80 calories. But how come the apple, the carb, can be this size and be 80 calories, where the butter, the hotel pat of butter, is about the same calories, but this size? It's because of the densities. So fat is 9 calories per gram, denser in calories compared to apples, carbs, 4 calories per gram, not as dense, a little bit more voluminous. So with fat, it takes up a smaller percent of the diet typically than carbs. So let's say fat is 35% of the diet, or typically under 30%. Then you times 0.35 times 2,000 to get 700 calories from fat. Divide that by 9 instead of 4 to get the grams of carbs. But no stress, no worries. You guys don't have to memorize that. It's just good to know the basis of where that comes from, as we calculated your meal planners, portion planners for you. So you don't have to do this math. So just so you guys can see a little of how that is calculated. Different things determine what percents of the diet carbs, fat, and protein take up. And we'll touch back on that later in the presentation. So this is a great little Venn diagram that I will upload for you guys to take a peek at. So sometimes when you're logging, things can get a little confusing because there's some foods that are carbs only, or fats only, or protein only. And with that being said, most often that people get tripped up on is there's some foods that are what you call like combination foods. Like Greek yogurt is protein and a carb, right? And of course, if it's a full fat Greek yogurt, it's protein, carb, and a fat, right? Tuna on here, I want to tweak and change. Tuna is actually a protein and a fat, right? So it's good to have this as a little cheat sheet just to look at, but again, we don't have to memorize this at all. It's just good to note it if you are questioning, oh, my protein's a little lower than I want it to be, but I'm trying to be in a calorie deficit and I want to keep my dietary fat down. What are some foods that are really just protein and not a lot of fat so I can mitigate that? For example, it's a common thing people run into. Other examples of combination foods are here, or we call them hybrid foods. Like I was saying, like tuna, a fatty fish, salmon, same situation. Dairy, depending on the fat content, can be carbs, fats, and proteins. We have combination foods that are like our protein bars, like an RX bar. Peanut butter is a moderate source of protein, a good source of fat, and has a little bit of carbs, not much though. Chia seeds have some protein and fat and are loaded in fiber. So again, there's combination foods, but we don't have to memorize these, and they're just good to acknowledge if we are deciding to food log. So let's break these down a little bit further. So again, we went into our food groups before, but we never really got to combine food groups with macronutrients. So we have our purple labeled food groups here, the non-starchy vegetables, starchy vegetables, which is like peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and squash. So those count as like a starch. So if you were to think about your plate as 1/4 protein, 1/4 a starch, and half our plate vegetables, or we would say non-starchy vegetables, that 1/4 your plate that is a starch could be a starchy vegetable like peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and squash. Our grains, our beans, if it's breakfast, like maybe our fruit. So that would all go in that like 1/4 of your plate consideration, right? And then you have your non-starchy vegetables, which is all the other vegetables that I did not mention. Then, like I said, fruits and grains are also your carbs. Then you have your food groups like your beans/legumes. Those we would count more in your starchy category, but they do have some protein. So it's a good way to beef up the protein in your meal if you find that you're lacking by adding a little beans as like a side or into rice or quinoa, for example. Foods that's a combination food that we were talking about, that's carbs, fats, and protein is dairy. Foods that are typically protein only are very lean animal meats or fish, like white fish, like cod, or like very lean chicken or turkey, for example, egg whites. Fats and proteins are like our fattier meats or like our whole eggs, right? Yolks have fat. Also, like our beef, think of like a nice filet mignon. Filet mignon is very marbleized with fat and very consistent with that fat throughout the meal. So that would be both a fat meal, excuse me, throughout the piece of meat. which is considered a fat and a protein. And some foods that are just fats only are really like our oils, like our olive oil, our avocado oil, our butter. So now that we're through like the more like conflicting things, let's go into each food group as a whole and macronutrients. So we have our carbs, right? Carbs typically contain fiber, which is a plant-based material that kind of passes from end to end. So it's considered indigestible in that it cannot be broken down into sugar molecules. And so really it goes through our body and into our colon, where it actually helps to feed the good bugs in our colon to help flourish I would say, a diverse, healthy microbiome. The key is that you want to have a diverse amount of bacteria in your gut. Uh, Food sources of fiber that are carbs is vegetables, fruit, beans and legumes, are whole grains, but some fats too have fiber, like nuts, for example. Why do we care about fiber? So fiber is key for healthy weight management because typically high fiber foods are low in calories, but fiber can slow down and also speed up a bit digestion. So a lot of when people want to take like those GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Manjaro, for example, that medication, what it does is we have those bugs in our gut that I was talking about that the fiber fuels and feeds. So those bugs, some of them make what's called incretin hormones. And incretin hormones travel up to the brain because those bugs in our gut and our brain talk and tell the brain, "Hey, I'm full, I'm satiated. I'm not looking for like more carbs right now. I'm good." So, with that being said, it can help to control cravings if you are feeding the right kind of bugs in your gut, getting enough fiber in your diet. But also, with that being said, too, those GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, I was saying, also slow down motility of the GI tract. So the person kind of feels fuller longer. So that's also what fiber does for us. So it's a good natural way to mimic some of the effects of these very popular weight loss drugs is by naturally just increasing our diet with fiber from fruits and vegetables to help us maintain a healthy weight and feel full and satiated. It can help to lower cholesterol, and that fiber acts almost like a netting, similar with blood sugar too, to help lower blood sugar, to trap cholesterol or sometimes, well, really more so cholesterol and pass it through the body. But that netting that we're talking about, that, with all the food we eat, slows down often the movement of that food through the GI tract to make us feel full. But it also slows down then the absorption of the sugar. So that sugar isn't just getting sucked into the GI tract and spiking super high in our bloodstream all at once. Instead, it can trickle in more slowly with the fiber moving it more slowly along your GI tract. So it normalizes bowel movements, right? It adds bulk to the stool, can also help to keep us regular, right? We should all be aiming to go to the bathroom about 2 to 3 times per day. It can also help been shown to help improve longevity and that it helps to reduce risk for other chronic metabolic diseases. And it reduces our risk for heart disease, diabetes, diverticulitis, for anybody who's ever had it, can be a little painful, constipation, colon cancer, and breast cancer, just to name a few. So fiber is king. With that being said, fiber is most commonly found in a lot of our carbs, right? And some fats. So you could see here on this graphic on the left, it is blue, then yellow, then like a red, right? Blue is meaning the outer circle is eat on occasion or a social splurge, special occasion, right? Yellow is not every day, but it's okay a few times per week. And like that red in the middle is like eat frequently, enjoy it, make it a regular part of your diet. So the colors are meant because blue is the hottest burning color. So meaning that when a flame is at its hottest, it's blue. So it's most inflammatory, right? Think hot, think pro-inflammatory. Risk for chronic inflammatory diseases, which are our largest killers of Americans: heart disease, diabetes, cancer. So we want to avoid those blue foods, those high inflammatory foods. So the least inflammatory is actually the red color in the center. So I thought that was just a fun way to categorize it. You guys will get a cheat sheet with all these pieces put together at the end of the presentation, by the way. So the way you want to see the scale of these foods and how they were chosen across these colors is similar to the right, the image on the right. So you have your more higher fiber foods on the inside of the spectrum, and then those higher fiber foods, as you go up from to yellow to blue, those are going to be lower fiber foods, more processed, higher in sugar, where the higher fiber foods often have a lot less sugar and are typically a lot less processed. And what will happen is they'll make you feel fuller longer, where I could eat how many slices of white bread or pasta and not feel full, versus if I have like a heartier cup of oatmeal or some beans, I'm going to feel a little bit more satiated or full from those foods. Um, the foods also on the left-hand side of the spectrum or in the red area, same thing, are less likely to spike your blood sugars as well because they're also lower in sugar. So carbs are a great source of energy, fiber, and vitamins, especially for those who like to exercise. The brain needs glucose to function, close to the amount of glucose of about 7 slices of bread. Not saying to eat 7 slices of bread, but that's about the quantity of glucose that we should be trying to obtain from like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and legumes. We need glucose to have the brain function. If we don't eat any carbs, our body will go into ketosis and create glucose from fat to fuel the brain, for example. High fiber foods or carbohydrates are recommended as part of a healthy diet and can help to reduce blood sugar levels as well as our cholesterol levels, like I was saying. And these are a list of some of those foods that we, of course, want us highlighting as part of our healthy diet. But don't, oops, but the common question is, but don't carbs cause weight gain? It's not necessarily true. So if someone's having a, a lot of refined carbs, right, like white bread carbs or white rice or pasta, often in their diet, and it's taking up a higher percent of their calories. So typically, depending on how athletic someone is, their medical status, we don't want to have carbs greater than, for most people, above like 50, 65%, right? Average woman in our population doing this challenge, or male doing this challenge, is probably around 40 to 50% carbs. So if their diet is starting to take up a greater percent, or their carbs are starting to take up a greater percent of their calories, that can be cause of weight gain for some, but also it's more so about how refined they are or how processed they are, because they're more apt to spike our sugars if there's not a lot of fiber in them and they are hyper palatable. They don't really make us feel full. They're foods that we could tend to eat quickly and over portion. And like we said, raise our blood sugars and make us more apt for insulin resistance and risk for diabetes. So large portions of refined carbs can lead to fatigue, aka less energy to be active as well, because it's that big spike with our blood sugars and then that big crash down for many, like that 3 o'clock crash, for example, if they ate a very carb heavy lunch that didn't have a lot of fiber, protein, or healthy fat. So just so you can see the difference there with like high fiber versus lower fiber, is like 100 radishes is 100 calories. But meanwhile, look at that size versus 34 pieces of penny pasta, 100 calories versus 100 raspberries for that 100 calories. So you could just see the density difference between the penny pasta and the radishes and the raspberries and how much more filling that would be compared to just having 34 pieces of penny. Still, I need more than just 100 raspberries. I'm going to need to put that with some like protein, like Greek yogurt, to really feel full. So again, this spectrum is the left is like your higher fiber foods. As I go across, it's your lower fiber foods. Those lower fiber foods are more apt to spike our blood sugars. Herbs and spices are great to include as a part of an anti-inflammatory diet. They are carbs, but they're very minimal carbs. They're almost like what you would call like a free food in that there's really no calories to them. So they help to enhance flavor, aroma, and color. Incorporating herbs and spices more into our diet helps to take away the desire for some to add sugar or salt to their meal. And they have lots of benefits because they're loaded in, excuse me, antioxidants. They are noted to be anti-inflammatory foods due to the types of bioactive constituents that are in them, like vitamins, flavonoids, for example. Because of those bioactive constituents that are listed below, they may have, or they've been demonstrated, I should say, to have anti-tumorigenic effects for certain types of tumors, which can also help with it being having anti-carcinogenic effects too. So it's because they have lots of antioxidants to help reduce free radical damage. So glucose and cholesterol lowering activities for some of them, think like garlic, right, has been noted to be a helpful tool for heart health, for example, and glucose lowering effects for some, meaning like the Ceylon cinnamon. It may help to lower blood sugar, but I wouldn't say it's super significant, but it may be just like a fun additive to coffee so that maybe it doesn't taste as sweet and may help to lower blood sugars on top of that. Or not taste as sweet, but taste is more flavorful so that maybe we don't want to add other sweets like sugar into the coffee because the cinnamon is flavoring it, for example. Other ways that we can add more of these herbs and spices to our diets is, of course, teas. Teas are rich in flavonoids, which are good for the brain, and as why teas are part of the MIND diet, which is also an anti-inflammatory diet, essentially the Mediterranean diet with an emphasis of tea and berries, which is what we're recommending for us today as part of our anti-inflammatory diet. Homemade pesto, rich with that basil, right, is a great way to add herbs and spices to the diet. Homemade sauces, dressings, right? We add our fresh parsley, our oregano, our rosemary, for example, to our different dressings and sauces. We, like I said, replace other things like salt and sugar. Marinades, infusing with olive oil. So some people have GI issues where onions really bother their stomach because they can be super fermentable in the gut. Maybe soaking or infusing, I should say, onions into our olive oil to get the flavor, but not necessarily get those fermentable fibers from the onions that can disrupt some of our GI tracts. Sofrito is another classic staple in the Mediterranean diet. As you can see the recipe below, often made in bulk, say maybe the beginning of the week, and can be used to flavor sauces as a base, add to eggs, dip some like whole grain crackers with them, with it, for example. But sofrito is a very anti-inflammatory Mediterranean staple that incorporates herbs and spices and would be a great meal prep, to be honest. So next, we're going to move on to protein. So with protein, same concept, right? Like I was talking about with the red, yellow, and then the blue color coding, right? So you're going to have on the inside your proteins that you should aim to try to eat on a more frequent daily basis. So that's like our beans and legumes, our lentils, our fish. I would be very careful with tofu, to be honest with you. You want to make sure it's non-GMO because tofu or soy is a highly processed food that can often be sprayed with a lot of pesticides. It's not necessarily the phytoestrogens that we're super concerned about, especially if someone does not have a history of estrogen-based cancers or a family health risk of that, and they're not pregnant or breastfeeding. But still, I would be very cautious unless the tofu is organic and non-GMO. But fish, of course, especially like our white lean fish, chicken, lean chicken breasts, turkey, egg whites, tempeh, those are good lean daily proteins. Um, Eggs, it's a myth that eggs are a high contributor to cholesterol. It's a moderate food because it's does have the fat in the yolk that people tend to overportion, when trying to hit the higher protein intake. So if you're trying to hit a higher protein intake, but you're going over your calories because the dietary fat is coming up a little too high, it might just be easier, just for the sake of manipulation of the calories, to do a couple egg whites, like 2 egg whites to 1 egg. We want to aim for about 20 to 35 grams of protein per meal for most individuals, and about 7 to 20 grams per snack in this challenge. The general population, this is ever changing, to be honest with you, because protein research is a hot button issue nowadays in the nutrition community. Typically, it's about 1 gram per kilogram body weight is what's being recommended now. So 1 pound per 2.2 kilograms. However, I'm noting, so if you did your weight and divided it by 2.2 and then multiplied that by 1 is what the protein needs would come out to. Depending on how active the person is, their medical conditions, I typically do a higher protein recommendation of at least 1.2, about 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight, or almost about 30% of the diet from protein, just to give you guys like a rough estimate, depending on the person, however. More is not always better, though. So just because someone needs to increase their protein, we still have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight, right? So it's all about keeping that protein high, feeding the muscles so that we're not losing muscle, we're losing fat, and then staying in a calorie deficit so that our body starts to utilize fat as fuel, for example. More, so that again, more is not always better. Consider plants as a good way to bump up protein. So you may have like your chicken on your plate, for example, or your tofu on your plate, but you have a starch on as your side. So maybe you're doing like edamame and rice, or beans and rice, or quinoa cooked with a little bone broth instead of 2 cups water and 1 cup quinoa when you're making it, maybe 1 cup bone broth, 1 cup water. And then 1 cup quinoa just to boost it, for example, even if we have the other main protein source. Typically, it's about 1/4 of our plates if we're thinking in terms of the my plate model. And my little fun ism, just to keep this, KISS, keep it simple, is to aim for proteins that swim, fly, or grow from the ground. Use caution with ones that have 4 legs and walk on land. Maybe try to aim for grass fed in those higher fat meats that have the 4 legs and walk on land. So this is a great little cheat sheet here. So if you want to pause this, take a screenshot, it's a great tool. So it's a bunch of proteins listed with about how much protein there is for a serving size. I'm not necessarily saying a portion size, meaning that, like, say you need 20 grams of protein at dinner, you would note that, okay, chicken is about 7 grams of protein for 1 ounce. So 7 times 3 is 21. I need about 3 ounces of protein to hit above 20 grams of protein at my lunch or dinner, for example. On the right, you could see some plant-based protein sources, which are also listed on that list to the left. But it's just a nice visual to highlight the plant-based protein sources and how much protein is in a serving or portion size. Next, we have healthy fats. So healthy fats, I don't like using the term bad, but just to keep it simple, there's good fats and bad fats, or fats to incorporate more routinely and fats to keep a little bit more just like as occasional social splurges. So we want to stay away from like our trans fats or our saturated fats. So those are solid fats at room temperature. Trans fats are always solid, and saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So trans fats actually, Congress, I think around 2001, I want to say, they actually declared war on trans fats. So you don't see a lot of them in the food supply as much, but you do really want to consume them as little as possible in the diet. They can still be found in some foods that are like commercially processed baked pastries and goods. I'd say, I think, like Entenmann's, cookies, donuts, vegetable shortening, are anything containing hydrogenated oils. So that's the tricky thing. Sometimes they'll say hydrogenated oils, but it won't be enough to equal 1 gram of trans fats. So it wouldn't have to be included on the label. So you could have a food that's about like just about a half a gram of trans fats, and say you have like 2 or 3 portions of it, you just wouldn't know how much it's adding up to because the way they had to label it. So there's like some sneaky stuff that goes on with that. Saturated fats, those you want to try to keep less than 7 to 10% of the diet. We think of the little ism when you're looking at the percent daily values on the food label as 5 is fine, 20 is plenty. So if you're keeping it under, 10% or trying to stick to that ism, you're likely going to be within your needs. Think like uh, feedlot raised red meat. I'm not saying free range or pasture raised, grass fed, I should say, red meat. That's going to be higher in your omega-3s and lower in your saturated fat. But yes, feedlot red meat will be higher in saturated fat. Same with like fatty chicken, like chicken skin, think whole fat dairy products that aren't really organic or like grass fed. And same with like our eggs that are not like pasture raised. Those can be typically higher in saturated fats in terms of the yolk. Where if it's grass fed, a lot of that saturated fat will actually reduce and you'll see a higher presence of omega-3s or anti-inflammatory, quote unquote, like our good fats, right? So our good fats are like our mono and poly unsaturated fats and our omega-3s, like I was mentioning before. You want monounsaturated fats to be about 20% of the diet, poly to be about 10%. Remember, we got a KISS, right? So your meal plan is factored for this in terms of how much fat is needed in your diet. So let's focus first on our calorie needs and like our macronutrients. And then over time, you hone in and get more and more specific with, okay, let me just take a month to try to really practice getting a little bit more monounsaturated fat in my diet. So a lot of this with nutrition can be overwhelming. Like, how do I start doing all of this at once? And the trick is we don't. We pick 2 to 3 things to focus on at one time, make that a habit, and then when we're ready, move on to the next objective. But it's just good to know what's out there and good to know what to be mindfully considering as we go throughout our day and prepping our foods. So monounsaturated fats are heart healthy fats like olive oil, uh, certain like some other oils like sesame oil, avocados are great source of monounsaturated fat and fiber. Olives and peanut butter, for example. Polyunsaturated fats, those are needed in smaller amounts in the diet. Think pumpkin seeds, which is also the highest natural food source of magnesium, which most people don't need enough of. Flax seeds, and like our fatty fish. Fatty fish are also great sources of omega-3s, so we want to strive to eat at least 2 to 3 servings per week. You don't really want to go too far above that with the fatty fish just for risk of mercury poisoning. If someone's vegetarian, yes, you can get omega-3s in the ALA form, where the marine-based fish form is the EPA DHA form. So the ALA omega-3 form, the plant-based form, is algae. Well, eggs aren't plant-based. I shouldn't say that. They're vegetarian friendly, depending on the type of vegetarian the person considers themselves, right? So if they're was it ovo vegetarian, right? Then that individual typically will consume eggs. So flaxseed oil, chia seeds, edamame, beans, walnuts, Brussels sprouts are all good examples of ALA omega-3s. But if the person is a vegetarian and they're okay with taking a fish based, so mind you, it wouldn't be a vegan-based supplement that has omega-3s, they do really want to aim for EPA DHA just because the brain will more readily absorb that. Higher quantities of omega-3s are needed if the individual chooses to only consume ALA omega-3s based on, personal beliefs. Everyone's has different needs, different bodies. So supplements of omega-3s could be provided in the algae form for someone who is vegan. So they're just good to know about, and they're really important and can actually impact our lifespan by about 4 to 7 years, believe it or not. So omega-3s are important in that if we do not take them in through food or diet, we are at very high risk for deficiency because our body does not make them on its own. And they help to make up our brain. So yes, it's a building block for our brain. So it's very, very important. I love omega-3s and talking about omega-3s, clearly. So building off that graphic that we've been building steadily throughout the presentation, this is like a good little cheat graphic that I made to display inflammatory or higher risk fats that are more going to put us at higher risk for heart disease, for example, versus our better fats, which are like our nuts, our seeds, our poly and monounsaturated fats, our avocado, right? Tahini, hummus. Eggs, if they're grass-fed or pasture-raised, I should say, then they can go in the better fat category. So just make sure you note that when deciphering fats from animals. Okay, so we went into our good fats. Olive oil. I just want to take a special note of olive oil because uh, at in a study that I worked on once, we had a group of 9/11 responders, and one group was paired with myself, and we did the Mediterranean diet, and they each got medical grade olive oil. And then in the other group, the other dietitian was the control group, and they did not get medical grade olive oil or the Mediterranean diet. We saw the most significant decrease in PTSD and depression symptoms in any of our previous studies done at the World Trade Center Health Program, done by psychologists, with the influence of the supportive nutrition counseling and the olive oil and the Mediterranean diet. And it significantly improved cardiac blood lipids in this study, like their LDL cholesterol, their oxidized LDL cholesterol. So olive oil is one of the most potent antioxidant-rich foods. It is a cornerstone food of the Mediterranean diet. Some of the antioxidants, just to name, is olipurpine. I can never say this right. Oli- Oleopine, um, oleocanthal is another very potent antioxidant involved with olive oil. So the antioxidants in olive oil help to reduce free radical damage, right? So oxidizes or gives an oxygen molecule to the free radical that is unbalanced and looking for an oxygen molecule. And when someone has these free radicals in their body, they're constantly trying to attach to other molecules and other molecules and other molecules. And that's like a very small biochemical um, on a very small biochemical level to explain like part of the origin of inflammation, right? So it can lead to like DNA damage and downstream effects of metabolism being affected by DNA damage. Um, Inflammation can also best be described if, say, I have a cut and I have a cut on my hand, or my head, whatever. And it's red, it's throbbing, blood is starting to go to it. There's macrophages, like immune system molecules going to that area to give it like a scab, and it's warm, it's hot, right? So that's what you would call like acute inflammation. So it's a short period of time. Chronic inflammation is that burning, that warmth, right? Like that same immune mediated um, effect, right, of the body. However, it's muted, but over a longer period of time. Chronic meaning over the course of at least 3 months, acute under 3 months about, right? So if someone has chronic inflammation, right, their immune system is activated. There's free radical damage going on, right? So the immune system is trying to also mount up defense to protect the body. So that constant activation is, depending on parts of the body, right, a very fundamental start of what you would call like chronic metabolic and pro-inflammatory diseases, right? Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, right? So following an anti-inflammatory diet, right? What we're talking about, a Mediterranean type diet, right? It's just another synonym way to describe anti-inflammatory diet. A MIND diet, it's all the same thing, right? The fundamental food is olive oil because of those antioxidants, right? So they help to extinguish the fire of inflammation along with like our fruits and vegetables, right? So these foods like plants, what gives them their color is what's called like a phytonutrient or like a phytochemical. So tomatoes are red. Tomatoes are red. Why? Because the plant creates lycopene. Lycopene or phytonutrients, phytochemicals are created, it's the same meaning, same term, phytonutrient, phytochemical. They are created by the plant typically so the plant can protect itself or lure in like insects or something for pollination. So tomatoes create lycopene. When we ingest tomatoes, we ingest that lycopene, and in turn, it's good for our heart, right? So on the other um, side of it, right, if I take in say anthocyanin, right? Anthocyanin is like in our berries. It's really good for our brain. It's good for my brain health. So this is why I keep harping on trying to have lots of these balanced food groups, right? Rich in our plants, because these plants, they give us those compounds, phytonutrients, phytochemicals that help us to reduce and extinguish that fire that is inflammation to reduce our risk for chronic metabolic inflammatory disease, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, obesity too. I should name obesity as a chronic metabolic disease. So the olive oil plays a significant role in that because it's very rich in antioxidants. Monounsaturated fats, of course, too, help to make us feel full, similar to protein. And olive oil contains about 13% of our vitamin E, 7% of our vitamin K, which can also help our bones and our blood, of course. Benefits of the antioxidants in our olive oil is angiogenic, right? Anti-inflammatory. 4+ tablespoons a day is a lot. So that's what's often recommended in research. However, we're trying to focus on weight alleviation. So that's where some things can be a little conflicting. So you want to try to stick to having at least a tablespoon or two of olive oil a day as part of your healthy fats. When you're cooking, some of that does burn off. So you would factor a tablespoon to into maybe like a teaspoon if you do decide to food log. Again, you don't have to food log, but it could be a good idea. When people reduce their saturated fat intake and increase their monounsaturated fat, say from olive oil, typically their bad or their LDL cholesterol goes down. Observational studies have shown a link between lower risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia is another chronic inflammatory metabolic disease. So of course, it's olive oil has been shown to lower that risk. Um, in those who use compared to those who don't use any or little to none. When you're buying olive oil, I just figure these seals are really good to know about. So there's the North American Olive Oil Association, and then of course you have the one below the International Olive Oil Council. Those seals help to ensure the country of origin is correct for where you're purchasing your olive oil from. It's a good source as well. So you can go to that website that is in green in between the two seals to look for some good brands of olive oil that you might like. I often like to recommend cold pressed versus ones that use heat. So the heat typically will denature some of those amazing anti-inflammatory antioxidants in the olive oil. So cold press can help to preserve those. Stay away from the light, right? Um, Funny expression. So you want to look for dark glass bottles or tins or like opaque tins you can't see through. That's why you want to keep them in a cool, dark place because fat oxidizes really easily. So if anybody takes omega-3s, vitamin Ds, I even gonna reference what I'm about to say with chia seeds too. I keep those fats in my fridge. I don't keep my olive oil in my fridge. That's in like the bottom cabinet and the back in the dark. But yeah, fats oxidize very easily. So consider storing your chia seeds, your flax oil, not flax oil, sorry, your ground flax seeds, your vitamin D, your omega-3s in the fridge. Look for those certifications. Olive oil typically lasts about a year to 18 months. If it went bad, it can smell like children's Play-Doh. Some people also say moose urine, but I am very fortunate that I do not know what the smell of moose urine is, so I would not know if it smelled like that. So let's just stick to Play-Doh. It's just funny to know that. Um, Look for extra virgin olive oil, a cold press, like I stated. Many oils are subjected to the high temperatures, like we mentioned, but we also want to note that smoke point is not a good indicator of the olive oil's stability, but just in case to aim on the side of caution, you want to try not to cook olive oil above 375. Um, and if you're going to cook above 375 or high on your burner, try to aim for avocado oil, which is another great source of monounsaturated fat. All olive oils are healthy, but the more flavor, typically the more health benefits because those antioxidants, especially that oleocanthal, is what can give it that richer, like almost acidic-y taste to it. But sometimes that comes with more cost, so that's what's a little frustrating. So we've been building this graphic all along throughout the presentation. So I wanted to show you guys, this is that stepping up to the plate, fun graphic that maybe have on your phone, just like when you're questioning, is this a food that I should be having? Is this a food I should be having often, maybe every day? It's a good thing to check in on. I also love how the bottom of the graphic has some mindful eating tips, like to savor our food, smell our food, chew our food, be present, have it on a plate, avoid eat on a plate versus standing off a napkin. Little just important things just to stay mindful of throughout our day. Um, and of course, at the um, middle section where it has the herbs, it has the non-starchy vegetables being half our plate. It says remember to use your herbs and spices too, like we touched upon. And also going back to our presentation from Saturday, the center of the entire graphic is the heart, right? And that says self-love. And nourishing our bodies and taking time to meal prep and feed ourselves these anti-inflammatory foods is an act of self-love because our body is our temple, it is our home. Sometimes this will take discipline, making new habits, but discipline is a form of self-love. Also, communication too is a big piece in this, being honest with ourselves, working with us. Christina and myself are here. We're available to you throughout this challenge. So please don't be a stranger. Message us if you're struggling at all, you have any questions. We're here for you. Consistency is king, right? If I do this for just a week, I can't expect to lose 10 pounds. It's about building a healthy lifestyle, instant gratification, good things take time, right? We want to avoid instant gratification and give ourselves the time to allow the best things in life to grow, right? Best things in life take time and we need to give them the water to grow. We want to stay mindful throughout this, mindful meaning conscious of what we're eating. The food logging can be a great tool to consider in the Practice Better app. And of course, preparation. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So we will be focusing on meal prep, which is fundamental and enables us to be able to get these anti-inflammatory foods in our diet. So macronutrient distribution, like we were talking about earlier, there's different percents that certain macronutrients take up in the diet. So we're recommending like a body recompositioning based macronutrient distribution. So we're going to keep to lower carbs, moderate high in protein, and moderate fat. But if someone's ever interested just to understand what other diets typically distribute their macros, like those bullets above with the plant-based, the low fat, the ketogenic, and the low carb are just examples. So I keep touching upon and mentioning subtly about the food logging throughout the presentation. It's not a part of the challenge at all. It's not mandatory. It's a tool that we're offering to you guys as just a fun, bonus that can maybe really help Not maybe. I definitely would say it will help with the body recompositioning aspect to the challenge. So the benefits of food logging is from the standpoint of I should know what I'm eating to know, what I maybe need to work on, right? Am I taking in too little protein? What about my fiber? Am I getting enough fiber? Am I, using it as a tool to stay mindful? So the concept, I bite it, I write it. So I love my family to pieces, but sometimes there's like candy and food that gets brought into the home that like is in sight and in mind and very accessible. So if I'm food logging, it helps to create that extra line of defense where I'm like, am I gonna want to write this down? And then it's really forcing me to think about it too. And then I'm saying, what will my future self, say to my present self? Is this just instant gratification? Do I want it? Do I need it? Am I craving? Am I hungry? So it's causing us to think about the food and also see it in terms of our budget. Does it fit into my budget? Am I over my carbs? Do I have a decent amount of calories left? So it creates awareness, it creates accountability. It's a good way to communicate with us too. So if you're like, oh, I noticed I lost weight, but I wanted to try to gain some more muscle. Can you take a peek at my food log and let me know what are some ways that I could capitalize so I can just keep growing and being my best self? Um, some people use it to note food and mood. So there is a mood tracking journal with the journal. So if, like for me, I notice if I get stressed or frustrated, I'm probably more apt to be like, darn, give me the popcorn. You know what I mean? Give me the chocolate. I'm feeling a little stressed today. So noting emotional eating, which we will build upon later in the presentation, in the challenge. In our last week, we will cover emotional eating. It can help to detect food intolerances if you know you have some various GI triggers and you want to record that with your journal. But overall, it's a great way for just us to learn ourselves and use it as a tool to build towards our goals. It's easy to get lost in the web of it. So it's acknowledging and picking like a few things at a time. So maybe I'm just going to focus on staying within my calories and my protein and my fiber. The first, month or so, I used my food logging app. And then maybe down the road, you focus on, am I getting enough magnesium? Am I getting, too much salt in or whatnot? Pick one or a few, 1 to 3 nutrients at a time to hone in on. And if sometimes the digital method isn't for you or isn't for someone, that's okay. There's so many ways to stay mindful. So we can do written food journals. The CDC has a great one on their website that keeps it simple just to write, approximate portion size and food. Some people have ones that they write the calories, the carbs, the fats, the proteins in. There's a bunch of free templates online, depending on what nutrients you want to hone in on. Pre-made templates. You can do other apps besides Practice Better. I personally really love the Lose It app. There's Chronometer. Um, Photo logging is another really easy way to keep conscious of our own personal intake of just taking pictures of what we eat. That's it. And then saving it into a different folder on your phone so you can reflect back on what did I eat this week and what areas could I maybe capitalize next week based on what I'm looking at in my journal. But again, not mandatory, but it's just a really good tool to know about that may help you get more towards your goals. Tips for better logging include setting intentions. Some people like to pre-log in what they plan to eat for the day, so it helps them to stick to the game plan, and then they edit it, what actual portions or what they actually ended up having. There's different link generators. Like I love the Lose It app in that I can take a link and copy and paste it into the Lose It app, and it'll generate the recipe that I made automatically for me. And then I just go through and approve what brands that I used. And then it calculates how many calories, carbs, fats, etc. I took in. We can set reminders to log. It's a good way to get connected in that like doing the logging with maybe our Fitbit or our Lose It app. We can share it with your, myself, Christina, your dietitian, friends, family, as a way to hold everybody accountable. And of course, it's just all about routine, 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 and building the habits if this is something that you are interested in. And small milestones equal large achievements. So, A 3-day streak can lead to a 1-week streak. A 1-week streak can lead to a 1-year streak, which the logging for long durations can sometimes help to progress other goals within that, like increasing our fiber, increasing our protein, staying in that calorie deficit. But again, it can, with all things nutrition, it can get convoluted, right? There's so many things to think about that we touched upon even in today's presentation. Like, what about my omega-3s? What about my protein? What about my fats? What about my vegetables? I want to do all of these things, right? So for the challenge, really try to just stick to that portion planner we gave you guys. If you want to log, it's a really good tool just to help keep you within your calories. If your goal is body recompositioning, just focus in on, following that meal planner, because if you're following those portions that we gave you guys, you're sticking to the carbs, fats, and proteins that we calculated for you guys to help with weight alleviation. And then it's always important to note your why, right? So if you're thinking like, should I be, focusing on the logging? Should I really just hone in on the meal prep? Should I really, am I doing all of that? Do I want to focus on other things? It all comes down to your why, right? Like, what's your why? What's the big thing that you're focusing in on? Am I focusing on trying to nourish my body a little bit better? Am I focusing on being a little less fatigued, a little less tired? Am I trying to lose weight and focus on body recompositioning? Okay, if I know what my main goal is, then I can create those other smaller goals that will help me get to it. So if I'm trying to focus on my body recompositioning, right, for the challenge, then I'm going to try to really hone in on eating enough protein, staying in my calorie deficit, and then focusing on my meal preparation. Focusing on those three things, the protein, the calorie deficit, and the meal preparation, will help us to achieve our why, which is I want to focus on my body recompositioning so I could feel maybe a little bit more comfortable in my body and reduce my risk for chronic, metabolic disease like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So it's just all, what's your why? And it's fun to think about that from time to time. With that, we want our why to come from what's called intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is not the devil, and it is also a good tool, though. So you want to think of intrinsic motivation of that organic desire from within to do something, right? Like, I want to do something. Where extrinsic motivation is like, I'm doing something because my doctor told me to do this, or it's something, my significant other wants, or I'm doing this so like maybe I'm focusing on body recompositioning so I can fit into that dress, so I can wear that bathing suit, or my doctor wants me to lose 5 pounds for my blood pressure. At the end of the day, those external motivators are great because they can help to push us along, but we really needs to come from inside, like a love, a desire, like that self-love, that desire to better ourselves and make this something like a process that we enjoy. Because if it's something that comes from within that makes us happy, a desire of, how we feel from the food. I enjoy eating healthier foods because my digestion is better. I have less fatigue, we're more likely to stay with it, right? So I hope you enjoyed today's presentations and that presentation, excuse me, this weekend's presentations, I should say, and that you're having a great start to the challenge. If you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Um, I thank you for your time. I thank you for listening to this, and have a wonderful, wonderful start to the first week of the challenge. And be well, guys. Bye.